Hello guys, today we're going to record another video for the YouTube channel because I got to introduce another indicator to our series. So back then we were using two indicators, which is framework and momentum exclusively. We're going to add a third one that is going to be used for every type of trader, every type of experienced in trading and stuff like that. I think it's a very powerful tool, but I must stress that immediately this is going to be an intermediate tool regarding the developments I'm making for pro indicators. So if you follow the your basis plan or whatever, I'm working on a semi-automated algorithm which is going to be fully customizable and triggering trades automatically, and also managing the trades after they have been opened, like setting automatic stop losses, automatic taking profit steps and stuff like that. So pretty much automatizing the strategy and the pro strategy and your way to behave in the markets. But the coronavirus has changed quite some things. It has delayed this thing significantly, and therefore I don't expect this thing to ever be released by the earlier than the end of this year. So in the meantime, we're halfway through the year, so waiting in here would be too long, and therefore I thought about releasing an additional intermediate indicator that will not be useful after the release of the actual full functional algorithm. But until then, as this one still remains speculative at that point, I really want you guys to be having professional tools, at least the best possible tools, immediately with the current conditions I can develop. So what we have is, there is obviously an already existing thing. That's something that has been released earlier this year as well, right into framework, which is the possibility for you guys to trigger automatic alerts from automatically detected contexts, which is basically the historical alerts in here that you can turn off, obviously, or turn on if you really want them. This is basically this stuff that you have in here, and in here. These are the automatically detected contexts, protected by password for the most dangerous ones, which are trending context, or even worse, reversal context or counter-trending context. All of those things that require a lot of knowledge and experience with the strategy. But despite that, so you would say, all right, so you already got this thing, so what the hell could this thing be about? What is this pro alerts, and how different can it be from this already existing stuff? Well, it's because of the way you behave with them. So the framework automatically detecting context algorithm is basically doing the job for you. So this one is pretty much more like a screener. It's something that you set and turn on, and then it automatically scrolls through prices to filter out interesting context or things that might require your attention. So it's really like, if you have the luxury of having pro plans into TradingView, therefore having multiple alerts, you can use this system to overwatch some assets you might not necessarily want to have a look in a daily basis, or some time frames you don't want to have a look at 10 times a day. And for example, if you're an intraday trader just trading on 2 assets, you would basically just use a 2 or 3 alert sets and basically stay the fuck away from the computer as long as these alerts don't trigger, because you will basically filter out all the uninteresting context and just have to verify those who triggered. But there is in here a absolute way of verification, which means you simply cannot trade these contexts all by themselves. Even if, for example, this one was just a perfect one, it had to be validated in any way. It's not that easy. Like, for example, if you bought in here, that would have been absolutely stupid, because this is not a range boundary. This is just an off-timed indication telling you that we probably are dealing with a ranging context nearby, and that therefore this would have been the prices you would care about, for example. So things are not easy, all right? It's not like there's an alert, you get a trade. It's more like there's an alert, something is interesting. It's more in here like an opportunistic way of trading that have been introduced with this semi-automated algorithm. Now something is different with Pro Alert. Considering out that this one works out this way, you set the alert, the market is analyzed, and the algorithm is producing an alert when it detects something reliable. Okay, so it's pretty much when some reliable conditions have been detected, you will get the alert. Okay, but you basically set the alert without even thinking about it. All right, it's more like, I would say, you set the algorithm and you're waiting for the algorithm to tell you something. So you don't really know what's going to come out of here. Okay, it's pretty much opportunistic. What Pro Alert is going to be doing is the exact opposite. You are going to set the algorithm for specific conditions. The algorithm is going to wait for them to be detected and will return a message to you. Okay, so if we consider that this is you and this is the algorithm, okay, this is totally different way of interacting. It's pretty much the opposite way. Okay, so different things, and therefore Pro Alert is going to be not an opportunistic way of trading, but a deterministic one, which means you have to know what you want to do with Pro Alerts, otherwise it's totally worthless. It's not going to provide any reliable information unless you know what to do. Okay, so for educational purposes, this tool will be an absolutely gorgeous one because it's going to help me quite a lot to automatize some things. And when, for some examples, I would tell you if this thing happens and then this thing happens, then this is an area in which we're going to have interesting stuff to look for. And that's something I generally tend to be doing. But today we have absolutely no tools giving us the opportunity to semi-automate this type of process. This is what Pro Alert is going to be about. So let's jump right into it and figure out how this thing works. So it's pre-programmed. So when you put this thing on the chart, you'll see those gray bars plotting on your charts, and you're going to say, what the fuck is that? Oh man, that's wicked. I've got the top price and the bottom price and the top price. Man, you got it all right. You're like a masterpiece. Then if you do this, you simply, first of all, don't understand shit about the strategy, because if you trade something you don't understand, you're going to go for some troubles. So rather than saying, oh man, these lines are gorgeous, I'm simply going to use this tool to automatically trade. That's not how it works. Like I said, it has to be deterministic. So I predefined some things in here for some specific context. Like in here, these things will be totally appropriate to highlight range boundaries. So I'm going to show you how I program this thing. Okay? So here is what this is. You're going to have to open in here the settings, all right, in order to set the algorithms appropriately. How this thing works is fairly easy. It's pretty much like you've got multiple conditions that are going to be available, which is this area of the parameters. Okay, so first set of parameters is basically you're going to have 1 condition, 2 condition, 3 condition, 4 condition. So it's a 4 condition algorithm. You can see that you have 4 time frames associated with them, which means this is a 4 condition multi-time frame algorithm detection, which is fairly great, and that's certainly not something you could be doing with any other existing stuff. So this is like a multi-conditional alert. If you were using the built-in system for TradingView, you would just have 1 single input into 1 single time frame. In here you've got 4 conditions multi-time frame based that will trigger the alert. So it's like an improved version of the alert system using my indicators. Okay, so what's next is an hold condition. I'll explain this one slightly later. Then comes the trigger logic, which is an absolutely important one in the perspective that you're going to have significant number of available choices out there, which is like the trigger logic. It's pure and simply what type of logic do you want to trigger the alerts? Do you want all the 4 conditions to be met? Obviously, that means you can also use less conditions. If you use this and set this one off, all right, like back to normal state, it will be by definition a valid condition. So if you look for 1, 2, and 3, and 4, you are basically going to have just a 3 condition validation to trigger the alert, okay? But you're going to have much more complex stuff, like the one I have used for this pre-programmed preset, which is basically 1 and 2, or 3 and 4. So the algorithms will be activated by two sets of conditions, combining two conditions themselves, okay? So it is this and this, or this and this. And the way I pre-program this stuff is this. So it was inside in here. Okay. So basically, if you try to read what I've said in here, it's pretty simple. You've got a time frame, you've got a condition. So let's try to understand what are the conditions that I've been mating out there. Okay. I basically said I want to be alerted anytime we go above the resistance channel. So it is going above this channel in here on the context time frame. So it is going above the context. Okay, pure and simply. So you're going to get an alert whenever the prices are above the context. The second conditions to trigger is being inside the resistance channel this time, but not on the context channel, but on the trend channel. So the alert condition you have in here is when prices are inside the trend channel and on top of the context channel. So definitely the conditions I teach you to trade ranging conditions. Okay, on the condition number 3, it's pretty much the opposite. Below support channel on the context and inside the support channel on the trend channel. So these are pretty much opposite conditions to be detected both to the upside and to the downside. So now let's assume that in the same case scenario, I wanted to have more precision, adding some additional condition. So let's say, for example, I want to have 3 conditions to define my resistant alerts. Then in this prospect, I cannot longer use this thing. I'm going to have to use this instead, and I will add my 3rd condition out there. Okay, so multiple way of programming this stuff, lots of liberty out there, lots of freedom of movement, so you can choose whatever the fuck you want. You will have additional conditions in here. I'll explain those, which means you can filter using the momentum. Okay, so this is considered to be a bracket. So if, for example, you require the momentum to be above 60 or below minus 60, it will basically delete every signal that has a momentum in between 60 and minus 60. Pure and simply, okay? Let's say, for example, I want to specify a bracket of a momentum being at least above 60, but not being skyrocketing and not going higher than 100. I don't want a sealed momentum, so if momentum is above 100, the alert will stop trigger. All right? Let's use this parameter as well, and you'll see these alerts have been deleted because these ones has a too violent momentum. You understand? The momentum was rocketing above 100, and therefore these signals we had previously has been erased. Okay? So it's really, like I said, a deterministic tool. You need to know what the fuck you want, because if you think that this thing is going to provide, you really got it all wrong. This thing is meant to behave the way you taught him to. So it's really understanding how the strategy works and knowing what you want rather than optimistic looking at the market in more of a opportunistic way. It's really deterministic out there. Okay, you can also have requiring a sine wave OK validation, for example, in which, for example, you're going to filter out if you don't have momentum, if you don't have sine wave OK. Okay, so let's switch on and off so you'll see the difference. Adding condition is adding filterings. Okay. And you would say, oh man, that's really gorgeous. I would have been alerted right in here. Oh man, what a tool. This is something you're going to have to learn how to properly use, because everything that is powerful comes with great responsibilities. Okay? But anyway, now let's take another rational example. More than anything else, I'm going to start using explaining the hold condition in here. So you need to understand that whenever there is a summation condition, a plus, okay? If this parameter is set to 0, means that 1 and 2 has to be validated in the same time. They have to trigger. Both of those conditions must be valid in the same time. But sometimes you're going to be using quite some harsh and complex triggers. And in that perspective, and specifically when you're using 1, 2, 3, and 4, if you set 4 conditions, you will see that the algorithms we actually rarely get to validate all 4 in the same time. That's the reason why using this hold conditions for valid will be actually quite useful, because what it will basically do is that it will hold a condition valid for a certain amount of bars. Let's assume that, for example, you would say crossing a moving average, and then you want the price to, for example, I don't know, break out the previous candle. Then in that perspective, you know that these things will rarely trigger in the same time. You know that these things will generally happen one after another in a very quick period of time. So you will have to define how long you consider these things to be valid for your signals to show up, and this will be the hold for valid. If, for example, you want the price to cross a moving average and then make a bearish engulfing within 5 bars, then you're going to use 5 as this parameter. Okay? Which means you will cross the moving average. The moving average condition will remain valid for an additional 5 bars. Okay, let me show you what this does actually on the indicator itself. Let's use a very simple condition, or let's stick with the conditions we had previously. Okay, let's now add a 5 in here and you'll see the difference. Okay, the conditions are now lasting longer. They are still filtered by the momentum, but their validated state lasts longer. In here, we're no longer above the resistant context, but still the algorithm considers the condition still valid because you told him to. Okay? Really simple as that. The price above and price below behaves exactly as the momentum, which means if we want to trade in a specific price area, you will set these brackets. You can set 1 or 2, which means if you just want price to be above a level and without signifying a maximum level to reach out to, you will simply use price above, and anytime price is above this level, it's considered granted. And you can set a maximum bracket, obviously, in here. Okay? I think that's pretty much it. All of what we have below is just options. So basically in here you can choose whatever the momentum source you want. If, for example, you want it to be an RSI, or if you want to trigger with a momentum oscillator, for example. Some scalpers will be doing these things, so I somehow anticipated the demand. You can decide the volatility standard deviation in here as a parameter for the standard deviations. Okay. You can use the moving average length, because there are moving averages as conditions. All right, you can use MA1 or MA2. So this is where you're going to set the time, the length of those moving averages. And finally, last but not least, max bars between then conditions. We haven't been talking about it, but this is the big strength of this indicator. You can use conditional order for things to happen. This is something pretty new, as for example you can use then condition, which means you're going to have a set of 4 conditions to set, but these conditions will have to occur in a specific order in order to work out. Okay, so let's assume, for example, you want the market to do this, then this, then this, then this. All right, that's something you want to be, you can do right now using this trigger logic. But therefore, you're going to have to use an additional parameter, which is this one, because the then condition will have to be occurring within a specific time, which means if you say, I want this to happen and then this, you must not have an open-ended time in between those conditions. Otherwise, if you really want a long time scale between the two, you're going to set a higher value in here. But most of the time, you want those conditions to trigger one after another with a specific time in between. That's the parameter we're talking about. What it says is that for the next conditions to validate must occur within 50 bars. Okay, so if you got 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then you've got first conditions being triggered. Okay, you're going to have up to 50 bar to trigger condition number 2. Otherwise, condition number 1 will reset to 0 or to inactive. Okay, and the process will start all over again. Once the activation of number 1 has been done, let's assume that we are now validating number 2. You now have 50 bars to get up to number 3. And as number 3 has been validated, you've got up to 50 bar to get to number 4. It is not a 50 bars for the overall structure. It's a 50 bar in between each then condition. Okay? I hope you do understand how this thing processes. Obviously, show historical alerts is this highlighting of the areas in the past in which the conditions you set it were activated previously. So it's acting like a backtest more than anything else. All right? So now let's take a quick example of something we want to be eventually doing with this thing. Okay? So let's assume that, resuming to the previous basic conditions we've had, let's say that today's strategy, and this is one of the things we're going to do more and more in the future into Discord as an educational tool, is that I'll give you sets of conditions to meet for today's trade or today's trade application and stuff like that. Okay, we're going to make trade applications. So let's assume, and I'm totally not making it, I'm just inventing this stuff right now. Let's assume that today's strategy is we're right up here when I tell you to set the algorithm for some specific conditions. Okay, and we'll say today we're going to wait for a market excess, but before this market excess to occur, we want price to reach out the trend channel first. So what we want is, first of all, we get there, and then we'll have to get there and get on top of the context channel, and we want to be dealing with the trend channel. So it is a very complex set of tools. That's something I've already taught you multiple times into Discord, but until today, we simply weren't unable to actually put it into an indicator to do the waiting job for us and tell us whenever our conditions were met or not. Okay, so that is how this thing happens. Okay, let's show an example. Let's assume that we now want to set the algorithm for this. We're going to go in here and set the indicator and plot the settings we wanted. So our first condition, more than anything else, is to set the logic. So we want something to happen, and then we want some conditions to be met. So this is what we want. We want 1, then 2, 3, and 4. So our first condition is to get below the support channel on the trend channel. Okay, that's what we wanted. We wanted price to go below the trend channel. So that's our first condition. Second condition is going to be we now want prices to go on top of the resistant context. So it's going to be resistant context above resistant context. Okay. We also want to be inside the trend channel. So it's going to be inside resistant context on the trend channel time frame. Okay. And we don't need an additional fourth condition. Okay, as simple as that. We could set an additional fourth condition if we want to, but the process we talked about is this one. We want prices to reach out the trend channel first and then return up to the resistant context within 50 bars. Okay, because there is that 50 bars limit. So we just got to the support context, which means if within 50 bars we retrace up to the resistant context in the trend channel, we'll get our alert. So as you can see, this is something slightly different than the preset we had earlier, because now we require the market to pre-work the price. We require the market to first get to test the trend channel before making an excess. This is quite similar to the previous pattern we've made on the presets, but we've added something. Now there is a precondition before activating the alert. Okay, we don't need a hold condition out there. We will set the same thing, but in here, for example, we want to make sure that the momentum isn't skyrocketing to 100, so we're going to limit it to 100 and set minus 55 as a limit. Okay, if we want this to happen in a specific price, as for example, today's biggest resistance is if we ever get to 31.20, we definitely no longer want this strategy to be applied, so we're going to set a maximum price at 31.20. Okay, so this would be our strategy, or the way to make this algorithm understand what I want to do. Now this thing understands what I want to do, and it will do the dirty job for me, which means patience is no longer necessary. Impatience biases are no longer at work, and therefore this is a very powerful tool for beginners, but not just. I am a professional, and I'm definitely going to use this thing because it's really, really great. It will help you in many ways, like understanding what you want to do, building your own strategies, and instead of staring at real-time charts when you know that what you want is not going to happen anytime soon, you're just going to set this thing on and let it fucking work. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And how do I set the alert? I would just basically set the OK button, all right, and get in here, just like any alert would be triggered. I will get up here and say get to pro alert. There is no other option. Okay, this would trigger the alert. I want it to be alerts once, and I want this to happen before the end of this week. So what I would do is that I'll go till Friday, market close, and that's pretty much going to be it. Okay, if these conditions are not met by Friday's candle close, I'm done with this scenario. What I just did in here is actual professional application of trading. That's how professional works. And that's how you should get to work more and more in the future. Getting to be deterministic with your market behaviors. You know what you want. You're just going to wait for them to show up. Okay? So it wasn't possible until now. Now it is. And this is one of the examples of things you might be getting to use when I'll be able to put the algorithm out there, the true algorithm, the semi-automated one with those types of conditions and stuff like that. Of course, that is just a V1, which means I will obviously add some new conditions in the futures and stuff like that. But I think it's a pretty good starting point. So that's why I'm releasing this version number 1 today. See you guys later, and I hope you understand how this thing works, and I hope you will be able to use this thing in a profitable manner. Later, guys.